If you're editing your photos on your phone, but Lightroom Mobile still confuses you, or if you're just trying to randomly piece together edits with random tools and you're getting bad results, then this video is for you. Today, I'm going to walk you through every single tool inside of Lightroom Mobile, step by step in the exact order that I would recommend using them in. We'll start off with the import process of getting your photos into Lightroom and go through absolutely everything all the way up to exporting your photos with the best settings possible. And if we haven't met yet, hey, my name's Zach, and I like to think I make learning photography pretty simple. Just before we dive into Lightroom Mobile, if you'd like to join my free 30-day Lightroom Accelerator program, you can do so in the first link in the description. You'll be getting a load of free practice raw files, presets, challenges, tips, tricks, lessons, so on and so forth, free for 30 days. All you've got to do is click on the first link in the description, and I'll see you in the first lesson. All right, with that out of the way, let's dive into Lightroom Mobile. Let's first kick things off with arguably the most important part, which is going to be importing your photos into Lightroom Mobile. When you open the Lightroom Mobile app, chances are it might not look exactly like this because I've got years and years and years of photos already imported into the app, but it will look somewhat similar to this. All you've got to do is come down to the bottom right-hand corner where there's a camera icon and a photo icon with a plus on it. Tap on that button there, and then this is where you get to choose where your photos are coming from. For 99% of us, we are going to be selecting device here, and then this is going to be opening up all the photos we have inside of our Photos app. So all you want to do now is navigate to where you have got your photos that you want to import. I'm going to choose this album I've got here, and then we are going to be importing this photo. I'm only going to be importing this one photo that I've got here, but keep in mind you can import as many as you like at once. So now that we've got that one selected, coming down to the bottom right-hand corner, I'm going to hit add, and more or less that is the import process taken care of. I can now open up that photo, and now we move on to the crop tool. The reason we want to start our edit off with the crop tool is because we want to make sure we know exactly what we are and aren't editing. So we don't want to spend any time on something that we could have just cropped out in the beginning of our edit. So let's take care of that now. Let's open up the crop tool and get things started. The first thing I want to do is hit straighten. This is going to make sure my photo is completely straight and things are looking good. If Lightroom hasn't absolutely nailed it, you can come down here and just rotate your thumb around the bottom of the image until you get it right, but in this situation, Lightroom has absolutely nailed it. Next up on the list is choosing our aspect ratio. At the moment, Instagram's newest feed update, feed aspect ratio, is 3:4. So if this photo was going on the feed, we wouldn't need to change the aspect ratio at all. The story aspect ratio for Instagram is 9:16. So if this was going on the story, we would maybe look at cropping it like that. I really like having the umbrella in the middle of our composition here. But for now, let's say this was going on the feed and we want to make sure we're getting more or less our full image just like that. There we go. It can be just a little bit fiddly. We've got our image straightened and we don't want to flip anything at all. You can come down here and rotate your image, for example, flip it horizontally and vertically, but more or less that's 90% of the crop tool out of the way. I'm going to come down to the bottom here, hit the tick, and now we get to move on to the light tab. So to get to the light tab, what we want to do is make our way down to the edit button right here. And now we have a whole new row of buttons we can select. And then we want to make our way over to light. Things are looking pretty good with this shot. I wouldn't say it's too bright or it's too dark, but if it was, this is where we'd be controlling it. We can adjust our exposure, which is the overall brightness or darkness of our image. It controls absolutely everything, the darkest parts of our image all the way through to the brightest parts of our image as well. Now, just a little side note, if you want to reset any of the sliders that you're playing around with on Lightroom Mobile anywhere, not just the light tab, all you've got to do is double tap on the slider and then it's going to reset it to 0 or where it was originally. So with the exposure slider out of the way, let's now move down to contrast. If I increase contrast, the darker parts of my image get darker and the brighter parts of my image get brighter. And of course, if I decrease contrast, the brighter parts of my image get a little darker and the darker parts of my image get a little bit brighter. So if you wanted more of a rich, deep, dark and moody feeling, you could look at increasing the contrast. And if you wanted to back it off a little bit and not have as of an intense image, then you could look at reducing your contrast. For now, I'm also going to leave this slider as is. Now we move into the highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. The highlights are going to control the bright parts of our shot. So having a look at this, maybe a a little bit of the sky reflection in the pool and the sky itself. So just like that, you can see we can control all of that with this slider. The shadows, surprise, surprise, they're going to control the darker parts of our image. And then the whites and blacks, they do affect our image differently to how the shadows and highlights do. The white slider is going to affect the brightest of the bright parts of our image, and the black slider is going to affect the darkest of the dark parts of our shot. So what adjustments would I make to this image here? Well, I would probably look at increasing the shadows just a little bit, maybe decreasing the highlights a touch, and overall, I'd be pretty happy with this shot. If you're shooting on your phone, chances are your phone's going to be nailing the exposure. Maybe from time to time, the iPhone overexposes your image. So all you've got to do there is come over to the exposure slider, drag that down a touch. But in this case, my iPhone hasn't done that. It's actually really nailed the exposure. Now that pretty much wraps up the light tab apart from the tone curve, which is in the top right-hand corner of our light tab. But for now, we're going to leave that and we will come back to that in just a moment. So moving our way over to the next tab, which is going to be our color tab. This is where we're going to be controlling the temperature, the tint, the vibrance, and the saturation of our shot. So the temperature is just going to be how warm or how cool our image is. The tint is going to be how green or how purple our image looks. And then the vibrance and saturation, although these sliders look very similar, they do very different things. So the saturation is going to affect all the colors evenly in our shot. If we increase it, it's going to pump all the colors up. If we decrease it, it's going to drop all of the colors back. Vibrance, however, only targets the less represented colors in our shot. So having a look at this image here, I would say green and blue are quite dominant. So if I just grabbed the vibrance slider here, you can see that it's trying to make the oranges of this umbrella almost balance out with the sky and the green in the rice terrace here. It's also going to grab the blues and greens and it will lift it up as well, but just not as much as saturation. As you can see there, the difference of 100 saturation versus 100 vibrance is completely different. For me personally, I never use vibrance or saturation. I do all of my color adjustments in another tool that I'll show you in just a minute. But before we get there, I need to walk you through how you can correct your white balance, because having an accurate white balance means your colors are accurate in your shot, and you need to make sure your colors are accurate in your shot before you go ahead and try and edit everything else in your photo. So having a look at our shot here, I would say the white balance is looking pretty accurate. An easy dead giveaway that you can always look for is something pure white in your shot and seeing if it's on the warmer side or if it's on the cooler side. I would definitely say this is on the warmer side, but we did shoot this quite early in the morning, so it's kind of the vibe. But on a shot like this, it's quite hard to understand if we need to make things cooler, warmer, and if we need to adjust the tint at all, because from how I'm looking at it, the colors look really accurate. So that's where Lightroom has helped us out a bit. Instead of having to go in here and adjusting each slider and making sure that things are looking accurate and true to life, we can come in here to white balance, hit the drop-down menu, and then hit auto. Now, personally, I do not like how this looks one bit. I think it's way too warm. So instead of going auto, I'm going to hit as shot. Another thing we can do is pick up this little dropper right here, and then we can zoom in on a part of our shot that should, and we can put the dropper over something that should be pure white, pure gray, or pure black. So I might select this black thing in the back right there. Okay, as you can see, Lightroom hasn't nailed it once again, but I would say I'm going to put this back to as shot, and we can probably just increase the temperature a little bit. Sort of takes a lot of that really deep, rich blueness out of the sky, which is fine. And this more or less represents exactly how the scene looked when I shot it. Those auto tools don't work every single time, but I would say maybe 80% of the time, they'll be able to sort you out. Now, there are so many other things inside of the color tab that we're going to be diving into in just a minute. We've got the color mix tab and the grading tab, which are two massive tools, and they're going to have a huge impact on your shot. But for now, we're actually going to close the color tab because we've gotten our image to a point where I like to call we've got our base edit done. We've corrected the exposure, which is the bright parts, dark parts, making sure things look evenly exposed. And then we've also gone in and adjusted our white balance to make sure our colors are accurate. So from here, you've got two options. You can either dive into Lightroom and go through the entire workflow to make your image exactly how you want it to be, and I'll show you that in just a second, or you can use Lightroom presets. Now, the reason you want to do these few little edits in the light tab and in the color tab before you put a preset on your photo is to give that preset the best chance of actually working. You want to make sure that your photo already has a really good base edit on it and things are looking accurate and good. and that means you'll get way better results when you're using presets. So just quickly, we're gonna open up the preset tab, which is in the bottom left-hand corner down here. Now, I have a load of presets that I use all the time. As you can see, we've got quite a lot saved in here. Don't want to spoil too much, but if you want to get your hands on some really good Lightroom presets that actually work, I'm going to show you them actually working in just a moment, you can head down to the second link in the description and pick them up. My personal favorites right now are any from my master collection, plus the AI Lightroom Toolkit, which is a game changer for editing quickly and accurately. Especially if you don't know too much about masking inside of Lightroom, this is gonna help you out incredibly, and I'll show you exactly how that works. So what I'm gonna do is open up my user presets, which is where I've got my AI Lightroom Toolkit. I only recently finished this product, so it's still a little bit messy on my phone, but when you go ahead and download it, it's all clean, organized, and it's gonna be in files for you. The idea with this preset pack is that every single preset name is going to do what it says it will do. So for example, if we have a look at this here, if I hit darken sky, you betcha, it's gonna darken sky, and then we can come in here and we can tap that little button right there, which is going to be the preset intensity slider, and we can increase it. You can see the sky gets a little darker, or we can decrease it and the sky gets a little bit brighter to how it looked before. And we can come down here and we can add a whole load of different presets to our shot. Once you're happy with the preset you want, all you've got to do is hit the tick, and then you can come back into the preset tab and continue stacking as many as you want on here. I've got a load of different AI presets that are going to help you out. They take advantage of Lightroom's powerful AI capability, and honestly, make editing super, super simple. But for today, I'm going to, actually, before we do, because this image is looking really, really nice, let's open up one of my Filmic Feels presets, and we can tap through a handful of these. These give a really nice retro filmic vibe to your image. And of course, you can come into the preset intensity slider here. You can increase it, decrease it, do whatever you want, get the look that you're after, and go from there. The Filmic feels such a vibe. And there we go, we've got our photo back to our base edit. That just gives you a little bit of an insight of how the preset tool works and how you should be approaching presets. Make sure that you've got a really good base edit on your photo, and then you can start applying presets from there. And I promise you, the results you're gonna get, even if you're not using my presets, it's gonna be way better. Okay, all right. Let's move on to the next tool. So let's head back into the light tab, and now we can open up the tone curve. This is a pretty complicated tool, and any large changes to this are gonna send your photo, honestly, nuclear. If I grab this spot right here and I move it like that, you can see things get out of hand pretty quickly, but luckily we can just double tap anywhere on the curve and it's gonna reset it. But the idea with the tone curve is this is where you get sort of an advanced level of control and a different way of controlling your image's exposure. So if we have a look at this tone curve right here, you can see we've got 2 points on the far left, in the bottom left corner, and in the top right-hand corner. Now these are our black and white points. The white point is in the top right-hand corner and the black point is in the bottom left-hand corner. So then you can see we've kind of got this grid that moves up. We've got one cross section here, which when I tap on, is just going to give me a point. I can tap on as many little parts of the curve I want right here. I'm going to reset all of those points because I only want one on there right now. And this is going to be roughly where our shadows sit. I'm then going to add another point right in the middle of our tone curve, and this is going to be our midtones. It's going to control roughly the overall exposure of our shot. And then I'm going to come up to the next cross section, and this is going to more or less control our highlights. So what we've created here is a line with 5 dots on it. From here, what we can do is adjust each dot as we see fit and kind of go from there. Now, one of the most classic ways to use the tone curve is to apply what we would call an S curve. It's one of the most basic curves, but it gives a really nice look to your shot and gives an overall nice layer of contrast. Of course, you can make it a really dramatic and big S curve, or you can just make it a slight S curve. Some photos are going to need more than others. What is an S curve? Let me show you exactly what that is. So the first point we're going to move is our shadows point down here. So I'm going to just move that down, which would be dropping the shadows. I'm then going to come to our middle point here and increase this just a little bit. This would be increasing the exposure just a touch. And then I'm going to come to our final point here, or well, our third point, I should say, and we are going to increase this a little bit. and this would be increasing our highlights. And as you can see now, we've sort of got like a rough S. It's a very flat S, but it's almost in the shape of an S, and this is what we would call an S-curve. Now, not every photo needs an S-curve, and not every photo is going to look good with an S-curve. However, 95% of the time, an S-curve is going to be getting you out of trouble. It takes a little while to sort of understand exactly how the tone curve works, and you need quite a lot of practice in here. Definitely much more practice than I can give you in the couple of minutes we've got right now talking about it. I've done a full tone curve breakdown on my channel, so if I've remembered to link that up here, it'll be linked up there, and I definitely recommend checking that video out. So for this photo here, I would say that we probably pushed the highlights a little bit too far, so I'd look at bringing those down a touch. And then the next thing I want to do is come down to the bottom left-hand corner and just increase the blacks point a little bit. This is going to add a nice level of fade over the darker parts of our image. You can see it being really dramatic here. If I just crank that all the way up, you can see some of the dark parts turning blue and purple, which is strange. But either way, we are going to leave it at about there with just a nice little subtle fade, and I would say things are looking pretty good. There's also this curve here, the red curve, the green curve, the blue curve, and then this curve here, which just allows you to play with things a little bit easier visually. But personally, I like the point curve, which is what we have already used. But these color curves right here, this is where you can push and pull different colors into different parts of your shot. So for example, let's say I put a point on the shadow spot here on the red curve. If I wanted to add red to the shadows of my shot, I would just increase it here. And if I wanted to take red away, I would decrease it. Personally, I really don't like using the RGB, the red, green, blue tone curves all that often. I much prefer my color workflow in the HSL tab or the color mix tab and the color grading tab. So with that out of the way, let's dive into the color tab and start getting into some of those color tools. First, kicking things off with the color mix tab. Now, there are 3 words I need you to remember here. We've got hue, saturation, and luminance. Hue changes the value of the color. So it changes what the color is. For example, since we're already on blue here, the hue of the blue, if I change the blue hue, I can either make it more purple or I can make it more green. That's the hue. Saturation is the intensity of the color. If I crank the saturation, we're going to get a lot more blue. It's going to look a lot more intense. And if I decrease it, it's more or less going to turn blue off. And then luminance is how bright or how dark a color is going to be. So if I increase this, the blues in our shot are going to get much brighter. And if I decrease this, they are going to get much darker. Now, the idea with the color mix tab is to go through all the colors listed above. So we've got red, orange, yellow, green, aqua, blue, purple, and magenta, and go through and edit each color individually. Now, like I said, I much prefer to be doing this rather than just getting one saturation slider and increasing or decreasing it. This way you get so much more control over the colors you do and don't want in your shot. So let's first start off with red. Having a look at this shot, I would say there isn't too much red going on, so I'm just going to decrease that a little bit. Orange is next up on the list. We've got these umbrellas in our shot here. So if I increase that, they become a little bit more intense, which I actually do kind of like. I would also look at making them just a little bit more red to give a bit more of a tropical vibe. And then also look at increasing the luminance to help them stand out a little bit. Over to the yellows now, which is going to, surprise, surprise, control a lot of the greens over here. If I desaturate that, you can see we get a bit of a different tone in the greens. So I'm going to reset that by double tapping. But let's zoom back out. We could look at probably decreasing the yellows a little bit. I find that dirty things are yellow in the image. So for example, if we have a look at the pavement around the pool, you can see that if I increase this, things get really intense. But if I decrease this, at least on iPhone photos, things look a little bit whiter and cleaner, and they almost just look a little bit more premium. So I really like decreasing the saturation on the yellows very, very often. And then the overall hue of it, I would say we're going to leave that as is. I like the color balance in our image so far. The luminance, let's also leave that at 0. Moving into the greens now, obviously we've got quite a lot of greens in our rice terrace behind the pool. I'm going to increase the greens just a touch. Just a little bit, nothing crazy. We've also got a little bit of green in our pool. Yeah, okay. We're going to increase the greens a little bit. I also really like the color, the hue of the greens, so I'm going to leave those as is. And then moving in to our aqua, this is where we are going to just desaturate things a touch. Now, this takes a lot of the blue and green areas out of our pool, which is what I like. I find it a little bit distracting when this is increased. You can see that right here on our palm tree, it's almost green. And then down here in the pool, you can see just things look almost like they've got like a lot of algae in there. So I'm going to reduce that. And now you can see our tree is way less green. I don't want to completely kill off the aquas, but overall I'm happy with how that looks. And then I might just push this over to the blue side a little bit. Now we can move into our blues, where I'm going to make the blues a little bit more teal. I'm also going to drop the luminance of our blues a touch, and then I'm happy with how that looks. Maybe drop the saturation a little bit. And then into the purples and magentas. Look, I don't think there's much purple and much magenta in our shot, but just for good measure, I'm going to desaturate these colors to make sure we don't have much purple or magenta in our shot. And we are done with the color mix tab. Now let's move into its next door neighbor, which is color grading. This is where we get to push and pull different colors into different parts of our shot. This is almost what the RGB tone curve would be. The red, green, and blue tone curves can kind of give you this sort of look as well, but I much prefer using the color grading tool over that. So we've got 4 dots, we've got 4 circles up in the top here. We've got the shadows, midtones, highlights, and the global color space as well. Now the idea here is we can just grab this wheel and move it around. Now, what we're doing when we're going around the circle is choosing the color we want to place in that spot. So right now, let's say we wanted to push blue into the shadows. That's great. And then we've also got this secondary circle here that's just a gray outline. If I grab that and move it back to the center, we're going to get 0 saturation. And as I move that closer out to the outside of the circle, we're going to get 100 saturation. So I don't want 0 and I don't want 100. I want something in between. But usually, the results when you use this tool are pretty intense. So I'm going to do probably a saturation of maybe 10. I'd say that's looking pretty good. And now we can move on to the midtones. Not every part of your image needs a new color. Just keep that in mind. So for example, I'm looking here, definitely not blue, definitely not green, definitely not purple or red. Probably a warmer tone would be quite nice. And then we're just going to look at backing that off a little bit. Oh, not too much. There we go, that looks quite nice. And then come into the highlights. We're probably gonna push a little bit more blue into the highlights again, but a bit more on the teal side, and then look at backing that off a lot. So we're not putting much. We've got 6 saturation here. We've got 9 saturation and 15 saturation. That's probably a little bit much. There we go, back to 10. And you can scroll down below these circles to be able to fine tune your sliders, because even me, I find using that little circle in the big color wheel is really finicky. Anyway, the last wheel, which is the global color wheel, probably the one that gets forgotten the most, is great for when you have one dominating color in your image. So let's say we're taking a photo of the sun, everything was warm, everything was really like red and rich and orange. Then we could probably like emphasize that by just pushing some warmth just into every other aspect of our shot. But for this image here, since we've got a load of warm tones in the greens, yellows, and oranges, and then we've got a lot of cool tones in the blues, aquas, obviously no purples in this image, I'm gonna leave it as is for now. I'm gonna hit done, and now we can move on. So the next tool I want to cover is the effects tool. Now in the effects tab, we have the texture, clarity, and dehaze slider. Now if you're just getting into Lightroom, you might be thinking to yourself, texture, crank that up. Clarity, crank that up. Dehaze, no idea what it does. Let's have a look. Okay, maybe just leave that as is. But as you can see, this looks horrible now, and we're going to reset these sliders. And that is because what we're doing here is essentially creating contrast and sharpness only in certain parts of our shot. So the texture and clarity slider are completely different. So when we increase the texture slider, it is going to be sharpening the finer details in our image. Sometimes this is good, sometimes this is bad. You might be thinking to yourself, when is it bad? Well, let's say you were taking like an up close face portrait of someone and you just go increase texture. All of a sudden, every tiny little skin imperfection is sharpened and highlighted. Not ideal. And then we've got clarity, which is going to be affecting the contrast of the mid-tones in our image. And I know that sounds super weird and just like a load of jargon, but the idea here is if we increase this like crazy, you can see things get brighter, things get darker, and it just makes the image feel a bit crunchy. There are times that you want to increase the clarity, but usually for me, I'm finding myself, believe it or not, decreasing the clarity between -30 and -10, and I also find myself decreasing the texture. Especially if you're shooting on a phone, I find that every single phone over sharpens images, and it's like a dead giveaway that photo was shot on a phone. So decreasing the texture and clarity actually gives a nicer, softer feeling to your image, and I'm a huge fan of it. Now, dehaze, we don't have much haze in this image, but the idea here, it's a really powerful tool. If you're shooting on a hazy day and you need to get some texture out from behind the haze, somehow, no idea what wizardry Lightroom is using, but it can cut down the haze. So if we have a look in the back here, we've got quite a bit of haze, a little bit of haze over these buildings in the back here. If I increase that, you can see it just comes out, it's really contrasty, it's really punchy now, but for this image, I'm gonna leave dehaze as is, and we can move on to vignette. Now, vignette is going to either brighten or darken around our image, around the corners of our shot. So if I decrease vignette, you can see the corners of our image get darker, and if I increase it, they get brighter. Now, I'm a huge fan of using the vignette tool. I actually love adding, I actually love adding a vignette to every single one of my shots, but I never use the vignette tool. And that's because I much prefer to use the masking tool. I find that you have so much more control over your vignette, and overall, it's just a way better experience. So let's say we just wanted to add a little bit of vignette to this shot. We can now come down here and change all of the other sliders that give us a little bit more control, but believe me, if you've got masking enabled on Lightroom, which I believe you just have to pay for, you're going to be getting a way better result and have way more fun doing it. So I'm going to reset vignette, and last but not least, let's have a look at grain. Of course, if we increase grain, we're going to be adding grain into our shot. So if we come here, if I reduce this, you can see there's no grain whatsoever, and then as I increase it, you can see we do get a lot more grain added to our image. And then we can come down here and change the size of the grain, we can change how rough it looks, so on and so forth. I'm going to reset these sliders. Once again, I like adding a little bit of grain to my images. I find that it just gives it a little bit more of a feeling, not like increasing the texture slider would, but it just gives the image a touch more character, and I really like the shot. And if you go check out my filmic tones presets, your photos are going to be getting a lot more grain, but added in a really tasteful way. So anyway, especially on iPhone photos, I add just a little bit of grain, and I'm a huge fan of how that looks. Now let's wrap up with detail and optics before we move into some other tools. Detail, we've got sharpening. Sharpening is a little bit of an interesting one. I never sharpen my images purely because I think lenses and phones these days arguably are too sharp. So I never come in here and sharpen things, but let's say you wanted to. Just cranking the sharpening slider is going to be sharpening everything in your image. From the sky to the subject to the foreground, everything will get sharpened. But if you don't want that to happen, what you can do is tap and hold on your image and then drag the masking slider. Now, things get out of hand real quick, but as you increase the masking slider, Lightroom detects the contrasted edges in your images, and then everything that is black will not be sharpened and everything that is white will be sharpened. So increasing masking for this shot to about 93 looks pretty good to me, and then 50 sharpening I would say is way too much. So backing that off to 10, things are slightly sharpened, nothing's going crazy here, but the most important part is that we're not sharpening the sky, because if we were, it would just make the image once again just look a little crunchy and weird. So definitely not a fan of that. And then moving into optics, this is really, really basic. All we've got to do here is tick on remove chromatic aberration. We don't really see much chromatic aberration these days because lenses and especially phones do a really good job at managing it. But chromatic aberration is weird purple and green fringing you can get between really dark parts of your image and really bright parts of your image, and then where they meet. So turning on remove chromatic aberration will usually do absolutely nothing to your image, but it's just a good thing to keep in mind. And then enabling lens correction, unless it's already built into your photo, especially if you're shooting JPEG, it probably will be already built into your photo, but this just removes any warping around the sides of your images or any unwanted vignette that your lens had created when you were taking the photo. So just enabling these two settings can be really effective, and it's always sort of like good housekeeping to do. producer. All right, so now that we have got all of the main tools out of the way, we can move into masking. Just a quick one, Lightroom has got a handful of auto options that I really haven't covered in depth or haven't covered at all. Personally, I like to manually edit all of my photos to make sure I have full control over absolutely everything. So I'm not going to dive into those auto settings at all. Let's move in straight to masking. So let's open up masking in the bottom corner and then tap on this blue plus. And just like that, we have now got a menu of masks we can add to our shot. So I'm not going to go through every single mask here, as some are somewhat self-explanatory. It's things like color ranges and luminance ranges. They get a little bit too detailed. So for this video today, we're just going over the very broad basics of everything. So I'm only going to cover brush, linear, and radial gradient. Let's first start off with the brush. This one's pretty straightforward. You just brush parts out that you want to edit. So let's say I wanted to edit the I've done quite well at staying in the lines there. Let's say I wanted to just edit the top of this one umbrella. I can then mask that out with the brush, and then I could look at increasing the temperature a little bit to help it stand out a bit. I could increase the saturation. I could increase the exposure if I wanted to, so on and so forth. This isn't a mask I would add. I would say let's discard changes. I would say for this image here, we don't really need to add any brush masks over anything, but the other two masks we will definitely use. So let's move into the linear gradient. This one I love adding to the bottom of my shot. So just drawing up a simple linear gradient like that, coming over to light, and then dropping the exposure adds a lot of depth to our shot. I find that darkening the bottom of the image just is a nice way to clean things up. And then we can also do the same thing at the top. So linear gradient from the top, light, probably not as much this time, ever so slightly, just like that, looking pretty nice. And then we can move into the radial gradient. So what I like to do with this one is add a vignette, and I can completely customize exactly where it is going to be. So I'm going to draw a radial gradient over the shot, and now you might be thinking to yourself, Zach, everything in the middle of the image is red. That's where you're going to be affecting. Well, what we can do is come over to the bottom left-hand corner, tap this little invert button, and now instead of selecting everything inside the mask, we're selecting everything on the outside of the mask. Now I can come into light and I can drop the exposure of this, and I can also come into color and drop the saturation, as I would say things were a little bit too saturated. And now I can hit the tick, and just like that, we have just completed a very basic, simple, but extremely effective masking workflow with these three masks. I find that the idea with masks is to just help your subject stand out more from the image. So it's either selecting your subject and making it brighter, making it more colorful, whatever, and then targeting everything else around your subject, maybe apart from the light, and killing it off, making it darker, making it less saturated to help your subject pop. Now you can do so much with masking, and when I say we aren't even scratching the surface on masking, believe me, the masking tool goes so deep and you can do so much with it, but today we're going to be leaving masking there. Okay, now the last tool we're going to cover before we export is the remove tool. This one is pretty straightforward and actually super automated, if you will, but what we want to do is come to the bottom right hand corner and tap on the little eraser here. And now we have a few options. Lightroom may automatically detect things in your image that you might want to remove. So just like that, it said remove people. We don't have any people in our shot, so we don't get to do that. But the idea here is that we can select things in our shot to remove them. So having a look at this image, there aren't too many things that I don't like about it or that I would want to remove. I could say maybe there's like a swimming pool tablet in here and then a reflection of this. Is that a bird? Whatever it is, I don't like this black dot in the pool. So what we can do is we can adjust how large we want the eraser tool to be. And then we've got two options. We've got detect objects and generative AI. If we turn on detect objects, this is just going to help us remove it a little bit easier. And using generative AI means instead of finding a part of the image and trying to replace it, which is how Lightroom would usually remove things, it's going to be using AI. I find that removing big things from your image definitely requires AI. So let's say, for example, if I was removing these umbrellas on the side, the palm tree and the roof here, I would want to use generative AI. Okay, let's undo that. We're not doing that. Back to the eraser tool. But for little things like this, you don't need generative AI. It just takes way too long, and it's super simple for Lightroom to nail this. So let's have a look here. Have a look at the size of our eraser. Cool. We're just going to go over this little tablet here. gone, just like that. I'm gonna come to this weird reflection here, and just like that, gone. We can come to that spot there, gone, and maybe we remove the bird as well. Gone, just like that. And now if I zoom out, there's no way you would ever know that that was there. Now, something that I haven't showed you, but I just did, is seeing a before and after of your edit. I'm sorry that I've left it so late in the video, but to be able to do this, you just need to tap and hold. It's gonna show you before, let go, and it shows you after. Let's say this photo is looking really nice so far. And there we go. That is the remove tool wrapped up. And all we've got left to do now is export our image. So to do that and to make sure that we're getting the best results that we can, and now export isn't, hijacking the quality of our shot, what we want to do is come over to the top right-hand corner and hit the share button. And now we've got a few options, okay? The first one we're going to do is save copy to device. But before we tap that, what we want to do is come to the little cog here. And now you pretty much want to copy and paste these exact export settings onto your Lightroom. So make sure you're exporting to JPEG. Dimensions are custom. If you want the absolute best quality, you want to do largest dimensions available. If you're exporting for Lightroom, 2700 pixels is where it's at. And then image quality, you want to make sure that is set to 100. I'm going to hit the tick there. And then all I've got to do is hit save copy to device and we're done. But there is one last thing I want to show you. We're going to hit share again, and then we're going to come into border and share. And this is where we get to add borders to our image. I add a load of white borders to so many of my Instagram posts, and this is a really nice and simple way to do it. So the first thing you want to do is actually come to the bottom of the screen and work out what aspect ratio you want to be using. So let's say, for example, this is already cropped for Instagram. Okay, let's say we want to put this on our story, but we don't want to crop anything out. I could come over to the Instagram story, 9:16, and now I get to choose the thickness of the border and the color of the border, which is super nice. But you can customize that to your heart's content, and then you can just change the thickness of the border. So let's say we wanted a nice pad around our image, and then we have some room at the top and room at the bottom to put some text on. We can then hit the share button. And there we go. Just like that, I can then hit save image. That's going to put it straight into my camera roll, and we are done. Wow, I definitely know that was a long video purely from the record time on my monitor there. But guys, thank you so much for watching. I really hope that I was able to break down maybe 90% of Lightroom Mobile, and hopefully now you can go out and edit your photos with a load more confidence and, most importantly, get way better results. Speaking of way better results, if you want 30 days of Lightroom advice, tips, tricks, lessons, challenges, presets, raw files, you name it, you can sign up to my 30-day Lightroom Accelerator program in the first link in the description. Will I see you over there? I hope so. Anyway, guys, once again, thank you so much for watching. And if you do want to continue learning about photography, photo editing, video and video editing, you can check out this video right here, and I'll see you over there.